And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's Friday's sea ice analysis here, showing the ice edge there mostly north of St. Matthew Island here, on down just south of Nunivak Island, and some new ice here in Bristol Bay. And now with the southerly winds coming in that are going to last for the next few days, we'll see this ice edge retreating back to the north and to the northeast a little bit, and probably start losing this new ice that's recently formed there in Bristol Bay. And for tonight's weather, pretty quiet, some clouds and maybe some light snow sliding eastward into the Tanana Valley, as well as up here North Slope area, a little bit of light stuff for the Arctic coast. And then with this weakening warm front, could see some lights, probably will see some light snow and gusty winds there. Kobuk Valley, Selawik, Kotzebue, right on up into the Noatak Valley in the northwest coast, and some snow here and gusty south winds or southeast winds there for the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, pretty dry with mild southerly winds blowing across the central and eastern Bering Sea here. Light winds for Bristol Bay, a lot of mid and high level clouds in there, and then this front here bringing some light rain to the central Aleutians, not very significant. For the southeast coast, cold high pressure here over the Yukon continues to drive Arctic air southward on northeast winds there, strongest over the northern southeast coast, but this low now pulling off to the south. Snow showers gone, clearing on the way for the southern areas if it hasn't happened already. And for tomorrow, this high is even stronger up here to the north, but the low pulling off and weakening. So the gradient does really increase further. In fact, it looks like it slackens off just a little bit there, but still enough for gale force winds in the inside waters there. Light winds, southern Alaska, with partly sunny to mostly clear skies. Still a chance of some snow, flurries, light snow, clouds more likely here in the Tanana Valley. Same thing for the northwest coast there. Weak trough, some light snow possible for the Arctic coast. Mixed precipitation, St. Lawrence Island. Mild southerly winds covering the Bering Sea with the main rain area here with this front over the central Aleutians. And a much stronger low bringing gale force winds out in that area to the southwest. And then for Sunday, that front edges eastward here and brings some rain into St. Matthew Island, possibly down to the Pribilofs with continued mild southerly flow. Ahead of that, even behind it, more of a south-southwesterly direction there. Rain spreading into the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Stays dry along the west coast here, but variable clouds there in the coastal areas, maybe a little ways inland, but mostly clear over the interior. You can still see high pressure ridging in from Canada into the interior here, and that keeping all this storminess back to the west. Kind of linking up with another high there south of Kodiak Island. So just dry conditions, light winds for the Gulf of Alaska. Still windy and cold over the southeast coast, but light winds over the interior. Pretty quiet day coming up on Sunday over much of interior Alaska. And for the coastal water forecast, south coast, north to northeast winds 30 to 40 knots. North coast, north to east winds 20 to 35 knots. Gale warnings here for Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north to northwest winds at 35 knots and north at 25 there for Clarence Strait. Gale warnings for Clarence Strait though on Sunday, and gale warnings for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. All still looking at northerly winds 35 to 40 knots. South coast, northeast 30 to 35 knots, and north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. So pretty windy weekend coming up here for all of the Panhandle. And for Prince William Sound, north winds 15 knots, North Gulf Coast, north winds 15 knots, except 30 knots out of the Copper River Delta. North to northeast winds 10 to 20 knots for Cook Inlet, north at 20 for the Kamishak Bay area, and northwest 25 for the Barren Islands. And for those areas tomorrow, Sunday, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots there. Otherwise, up north at Cook Inlet, north to northeast, down to 15 knots now for Sunday. Light north winds, Prince William Sound at 10 knots. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots now for the North Gulf Coast. And for Kodiak Island tomorrow, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Variable winds at 10 knots for Bristol Bay. And southeast winds, south to southeasterlies, 15 to 20 for the Alaska Peninsula. And for Sunday, for the peninsula here, south to southeast winds, 15 to 30 knots. Southeast at 15 for Bristol Bay, Kodiak, westerlies, 15 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, southeast winds, 30 to 40 knots. Stronger gales for Adak and Atka, southeast 45 knots. For the western Aleutians, gale warnings also Northeast to east to southeast winds at 35 to 40 knots. And then for the day on Sunday, the western Aleutians, looking at south to southwest winds at 20 to 30 knots. Adak and Atka here, south at 25. Still looking at gales there for the eastern Aleutians. South to southeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, southeast at 20. South winds 25 for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, and Norton Sound. And small craft advisories for the Pribilof, St. Matthew Island. Both locations there looking at southeast winds at 30 knots with seas around 12 feet. And for the day on Sunday, Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, southeast 35 knots, so good for gales on Sunday there. Southeast 25 to 30 knots for the southwest coast. About the same for St. Lawrence Island, south at 20 for Norton Sound. And for the Arctic coast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories, east winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds at 35 knots. And then for the day Sunday, west winds 15 to 20 knots for the central and eastern Beaufort coast. Western coast here south at 20 for the Chukchi Sea. Brisk wind advisories, south to southeast 25 to 30 knots.